Hello and welcome to Psalm a Day. My name is Evan. I'm one of the ministers at St Mary's Anglican Church. And today for Psalm a Day, we're reading Psalm 132. So please open up your Bibles, turn it up to Psalm 132, and let's read this psalm together. Psalm 132, a song of ascents. O Lord, remember David and all the hardships he endured. He swore an oath to the Lord and made a vow to the Mighty One of Jacob. I will not enter my house or go to my bed. I will allow no sleep to my eyes, no slumber to my eyelids, till I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the Mighty One of Jacob. We heard it in Ephrath. We came down upon it in the fields of Jaar. Let us go to his dwelling place. Let us worship at his footstool. Arise, O Lord, and come to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. May your priests be clothed with righteousness. May your saints sing for joy. For the sake of David your servant, do not reject your anointed one. The Lord swore an oath to David, a sure oath that he will not revoke. One of your own descendants I will place on the throne. If your sons keep my covenant and the statutes I teach them, then their sons will sit on the throne forever and ever. For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his dwelling. This is my resting place forever and ever. Here I will sit enthroned, for I have desired it. I will bless her with abundant provisions. Her poor I will satisfy with food. I will clothe her priests with salvation, and her saints will ever sing for joy. Here I will make a horn grow for David, and set up a lamp for my anointed one. I will clothe his enemies with shame, but the crown on his head will be resplendent. And here is a psalm which looks to David as the epitome of Israel, of God's kingdom. I guess he is the first king of Israel. Correction, he is the second king of Israel, but he is the greatest king of Israel. And here the psalmist sings a song of joy concerning David, concerning the vows he made before the Lord and his desire to give the Lord a temple, particularly if you can remember that particular episode in 2 Samuel where David is in his... what is it called again? Like castle? David is in his palace. Yeah. But the Lord is still in a tent. And so David makes a vow very similar to this one. And so because of this, the Lord promises to David that one of his descendants will always be on the throne of Israel. But it's interesting, in the psalm here, there's a conditional little statement. If your sons keep my covenant and the statutes I teach them, their sons will sit on your throne forever and ever. Which, of course, they didn't do. They didn't listen to God. They betrayed God and they betrayed God's people. And we can read of those accounts in 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles. That every now and again there was a good king, but they're all bad. Sorry, but lots of them, nearly all of them, were bad. But here the psalmist makes the plea. He says it twice, doesn't he? For the sake of David your servant, do not reject your anointed one. Yeah, and then again in verse 17 and 18, a similar cry. Now the anointed one there is referring to the king of Israel. Literally, because that's what would happen during the enthronement ceremony. Oil would be poured over the new king's head to signify that he was God's chosen king. But unfortunately, this psalm doesn't fall short. It overstates the glory of the people who actually were kings, because they were sinners, they were failures. But it points forward to the one true King of Israel. And when we read this in light of Jesus, then we can really see how the psalm blossoms to life. Yes, it starts with David, but it finishes with Jesus. Jesus is the perfect king. Unlike David, Jesus never sinned. And Jesus is a perfect ruler to his people, to God's people, to his nation. So I guess, so when we look at this psalm in light of who the kings of Israel were in the Bible, in 1 and 2 Kings, 1 2 Chronicles, the psalm, it doesn't sound right. It sounds like, it's like a food critic trying to pass off a McDonald's burger as the best thing they've ever eaten. It's like I'm thinking some really abstract sort of analogies. It's like sleeping on rocky ground, but then proclaiming it to be better than any of the mattresses in the whole world. No, yeah, not quite right. But when you bring Jesus into the picture, and we see Jesus as the true King of Israel, and the full realization of God's anointed one, then it makes sense for us. And we can read verses 17 and 18 again. I'll make a horn grow for David and set up a lamp for my anointed one. I will clothe his enemies with shame, but the crown on his head will be resplendent. Because unfortunately, the kings of Israel were brought to shame in death. They were brought to shame in the things that they did. But Jesus redeems all of our shame. Jesus redeems all of our sin. And because of that, he receives glory from God, as God, according to Ephesians 1, is bringing everything under his feet, and he will be the king of all of creation. That's a king who I want to live for. That's a king who I would gladly be a subject of. A king who will die for his people, sacrifice himself for his people. Doesn't hoard power, doesn't make bad decisions, but leads his people perfectly. That's my king. Grace and peace to you.